The rooster had barely finished its first crow when the village of Kalu began to stir from its slumber. Palm trees danced gently to the rhythm of the morning wind, and the scent of roasted maize drifted from a distant hearth. Amid the woven beauty of early dawn was the quiet compound of Elder Namdi, one of the most powerful men in Kalu. His voice alone could settle village disputes, and his judgment, whether fair or flawed, was considered divine. A former warrior turned elder, Elder Namdi was feared and respected equally. But what the village didn't know was that behind the high mud walls of his compound, he ruled his family with an iron heart wrapped in silence. His daughter, Amara, was the rose of his old age, an 18-year-old girl whose eyes mirrored the morning sky and whose laughter once made the mango trees sway as if in joy. She was beloved in the village. Whenever she passed, elders would nod, saying, "That child is the kind we all wish to raise." Women praised her humility, men her poise, and children followed her for the sweetness of her voice and the pieces of ground nuts she always carried in her woven bag. She lived in a neat little hut beside her mother's room, always rising early, to fetch water from the stream before heading to the church choir or helping at her mother's market stall. Her life was simple, ordered, respected, until one morning when everything began to unravel. Amara stopped singing. At first it was just her voice that disappeared, then her smile. She began retreating into herself, sleeping longer, eating less, and wandering off into the woods near the cassava fields for no reason. Her hands, once swift and eager, grew heavy. She often sat alone under the ogbono tree, staring into nothing. Her mother, Mama Azin, noticed these changes immediately. A deeply intuitive woman who had raised Amara with the softness of a lullaby and the firmness of firewood, she knew her daughter too well. One night, as the moon poured its soft silver light over the rooftops, Mama Azin crept into Amara's room. The girl lay curled on her mat, her back turned, her breath slow but troubled. Mama Azina placed her hand gently on Amara's shoulder and whispered, "My daughter, what burden darkens your eyes?" Amara said nothing. Only tears answered, silent, steady drops that soaked into her wrapper. The next morning, without telling her husband, Mama Azin took Amara to the village healer, an old woman named Nwunye Ugo, who knew every ailment of the body and heart. After asking a few questions and placing her weathered hands on Amara's belly, Nwunye Ugo looked up with quiet certainty and said, "She is with child, almost 3 months now." Mama Azine's legs failed her. Her breath vanished. "Child? Amara?" Her voice cracked like dry earth. "It cannot be." But the evidence lay silently in her daughter's eyes, which brimmed with guilt and silent pain. The walk back to the compound was a long one. Words floated in the air but never landed. That evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Elder Namdi returned from the elders' council. His wrapper hung tightly over his shoulder. His walking staff marked each step with authority. He greeted no one as he entered. The moment his wife spoke the truth, something inside him snapped. A scream thundered through the compound. "You what?" he shouted, rising so violently from his stool that it crashed behind him. "Pregnant? Under my roof? With no husband? No explanation? No father named?" Amara knelt, her body trembling. "Papa, please," she began. "Don't call me that," he barked, spit flying from his mouth. "You, my only child, have brought disgrace upon my lineage. You have spat on the legacy of our ancestors." His rage drew attention. Neighbors gathered quietly at the compound gate. The story traveled quickly. Elder Namdi's daughter. Pregnant? Out of wedlock? Women gasped. Some clutched their wrappers to their chest. Men shook their heads in disappointment. The pride of Kalu village had fallen. Mama Izini tried to speak, but Elder Namdi raised his staff, not to strike, but to silence. "Do not defend her," If she cannot name the man who defiled her, if she cannot stand here and tell me the truth, then she has no place here." Amara wept. Her voice barely carried. "You will not believe me even if I tell you. I said speak," Elder Namdi roared, pointing the staff at her chest. But Amara stayed silent. She knew the truth would break not only his pride, but his spirit. Because the man who had taken advantage of her was someone they both knew, someone he trusted like a brother. And that truth, if spoken, would destroy more than just their household. It would tear the whole village apart. So she bit her tongue and lowered her head. That night, Elder Namdi did the unthinkable. He dragged his daughter's clothes out of her room, threw them into the yard, and pointed toward the gate. "Leave. Leave now, before the gods strike this house for your abomination." Mama Ezzini collapsed to her knees, wailing. "Please, my husband, think of her. She is your only child. Let her stay. We can—" "Enough." Amara, barefoot and broken, picked up her small bundle. She turned one last time, her eyes pleading with the man who once called her his moonlight. But Elder Namdi turned away. She walked out of the compound as darkness settled, her shadow stretching long behind her. No one followed. No one dared. The village watched, some in pity, some in disgust. A few wept silently. But no hand reached out. No voice called her name, and so began the journey of the girl who once carried a village's pride, now carrying nothing but her unborn child, and a heart shattered in silence. The road from Kalu was long, unpaved, and indifferent to sorrow. Amara's bare feet met stone and thorn, mud and dust. Her wrapper was tied tight, holding her few belongings, a faded photograph of her mother, a small tin cup, and the crumbled remains of roasted plantain she'd carried from the compound. As the sun dipped lower into the orange horizon and the birds began calling each other home, Amara walked further into the unknown, away from everything she had ever called home. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her back ached, her legs trembled, but she kept walking. She didn't know where she was headed. All she knew was that she couldn't turn back. Not to the compound that had rejected her, not to the father who had cursed her, and certainly not to the whispers of the village that once celebrated her name, but now carried it like dust on their tongues. Night fell fast and cruel. The forest surrounding the narrow footpath grew darker, filled with the ominous hoots of owls and rustling shadows. Amara was not afraid of wild animals. What she feared most was people. Men. Faces hiding behind trees. Words coated in charm and threat. She'd seen what could happen to a girl on the road alone. She gripped her belly and kept walking until her legs finally gave in near the edge of a small, unfamiliar town. She collapsed beside a closed provision store. Her head fell against a wooden bench, and she drifted off with one hand clutched over her growing stomach. The next morning, she woke to whispers and a crowd. "Who is she?" "She looks like she's been walking for days." "She's pregnant." And alone. Amara's eyes fluttered open as the early sun bathed the world in gold. The first thing she saw was a tall, elderly woman wrapped in a faded blue Ankara wrapper. Her eyes were sharp but kind. "Child," the woman said, crouching beside her, "what are you doing sleeping outside in this condition?" Amara sat up, quickly, startled, and pulled her bag closer. Her voice came out in a dry whisper. "Please, I don't mean any harm. I was only passing." "Where are you going?" "I don't know." The woman studied her for a moment, then stood up and spoke to the crowd. "Go and mind your business, all of you. Is this how you treat a girl in distress?" The murmuring crowd dispersed reluctantly, leaving the woman and Amara alone. "My name is Mama Chinyer," she said, offering a hand. "Get up. Come with me. You look like you haven't eaten in days." Amara hesitated. The last time someone offered her kindness without question, it came with betrayal. But something in Mama Chinyere's tone carried truth. The kind of truth that reminded Amara of her mother. Slowly, she reached out and took the woman's hand. They walked down the sandy lane to a humble house near the edge of the town. It wasn't much. 2 rooms with a sagging zinc roof and a yard filled with cassava peels and cooking pots. But it felt like safety. Inside, Mama Chinyere offered her water, then a warm plate of rice and palm oil stew. Amara ate slowly at first, watching the woman closely, unsure whether this too would come at a price. But no questions came, no demands. Just the silent clatter of pots and the soft sound of a woman humming a gospel tune in the kitchen. Later that afternoon, as Amara sat outside under the guava tree, Mama Chinyere returned with a faded wrapper and a bar of local black soap. "Go and wash. You need to feel human again," she said. Amara stared at her, unsure of how to respond. The tears came before the words. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Mama Chinyere looked at her and replied, "Because I once had a daughter who got pregnant too. I wasn't there for her. I lost her. And I swore, if I ever met another girl with sorrow in her eyes, I would not turn away again." That night, Amara lay on a mat in the corner of the room, her belly rising and falling like the tide. Outside, crickets sang, and the wind pushed gently against the curtain. Inside, for the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. Days passed, then weeks. Amara began helping Mama Chinyere with small things: sweeping, peeling yams, cooking ogbono soup. People in the neighborhood started noticing her. They began asking, "Who is the girl?" Some whispered she might be Mama's distant niece. Others suspected a stranger with a dark past. But no one dared question Mama Chinyere directly. In the quiet of those days, Amara found small joy. In watching the rain fall, in brushing her hair with a comb Mama Chinyere bought for her, in the way her belly kicked with life every morning. But even with kindness and food and shelter, the burden of silence still lived in her chest. She had not told Mama Chinyere about what really happened, about how the man her father trusted like a brother was the one who had taken everything from her. She hadn't told her about the lies, the fear, or the shame. She couldn't. Not yet. Then came the night of the birth. The rain poured hard, thunder rolling over the rooftops. Amara woke with a scream, clutching her stomach. The pain was like fire licking her insides. Mama Chinyere rushed in, already wrapping her head with a scarf. "Tonight," she said calmly. "It's time." There was no doctor, no hospital, only hot water, herbs, torn wrappers, and the strength of a woman who had delivered 10 babies in her life. Amara screamed, pushed, bit down on her lips until they bled. She cried for her mother. She cried for herself. She cried for the child who had no father to welcome him into the world. And just before dawn, the child arrived, wet, crying, and strong, a boy. His fists were clenched, his mouth open in protest, as if to announce he would not be silent like his mother. Amara held him close to her chest, sobbing. "What will you name him?" Mama Chinyere asked softly. She looked at the boy's face, traced his forehead with her finger, and whispered, "Zikora. It means, show the world." Because one day the world would hear their story. She didn't know when or how. But something deep in her soul whispered that their pain would not be wasted. And so, in the quiet corners of a small town far from her village, Amara and Zikora began a new chapter, born not of shame, but of survival. Not in riches, but in hope. They had nothing. But for the first time in a long time, they had each other. Months passed like whispers in the wind, and the small house at the edge of the town became Amara's sanctuary. Every morning began with Zikora's cries, loud, hungry and defiant, as if the child already knew the world owed him no favors. Amara would rise, wrap him tightly to her back with one of Mama Chiniere's old wrappers, and begin her day with the firewood stove crackling before the first cock crowed. She swept the yard, she fetched water from the public tap, and then she walked to the market. It started small, just a tray of roasted ground nuts and chin-chin in a corner of the noisy town market. Amara would kneel on a piece of sackcloth, her child tied to her back, her tray before her like an offering. At first, people passed without looking. Then one day, a mechanic bought a handful of chin-chin and returned the next day. Then a woman who sold vegetables tasted her ground nuts and brought back her friends. Slowly, like the roots of an okra. Plant stretching beneath the soil, word spread. She's the girl with the soft hands. Her chin-chin tastes like back in the village. She roasts her ground nuts with honey. It's different, and just like that, Amara began to grow. But with every step forward, there are always shadows lurking behind. One day, as the sun rose higher and the market buzzed with life, a black SUV rolled slowly through the marketplace. Shiny, tinted, and humming like a beast, the vehicle drew stares and whispers. From it stepped a tall man in a white caftan with golden embroidery and polished brown sandals. His wristwatch gleamed in the sun. His smile, too wide, too practiced. He walked up to Amara's tray. "You're quite the entrepreneur," he said, smoothly, picking a piece of chin-chin without asking. "And this little boy?" He gestured to Zikora, now dozing on her back. "My son," Amara answered cautiously, adjusting her wrapper. Her instincts prickled like goosebumps on her neck. "I'm Chief Whale. I own the new hotel beside the highway," he said, placing a card on her tray. "We need hard-working young women like you. Come and work with us. We pay well. Clean rooms, assist guests. It's a step up from roasting nuts on the floor." Amara stared at the card but didn't touch it. "I'll think about it," she said. Chief Whale nodded, his eyes lingering too long on her chest before he walked off, blending into the market crowd. That night when she told Mama Chiniere about it, the old woman narrowed her eyes and said, "Be careful. A man with gold on his wrist and no kindness in his eyes is more dangerous than a snake with no rattle." But the next morning, when Amara returned to her usual market spot, 2 boys were sitting there, teenagers with shifty eyes and oversized trays of cheap sweets. She confronted them. "This is my spot," she said, planting her feet. One of the boys shrugged. "Madam, na first come, first serve." "Who sent you?" They smirked. "Na ogawe get hotel say make we sit here now. Na market space abi no be your land." Amara stepped back. The message was clear. Chief Whale was claiming her corner, unless she came to him. The following week, her business stalled. Her suppliers claimed they were out of stock. The woman who sold her raw ground nuts said she couldn't sell to her anymore because one big man has bought it all. Even the woman who once offered her free firewood now avoided her eyes. The walls were closing in. Mama Chiniere saw the signs. "These people are not just buying silence," she warned. "They are trying to break you into surrender." By the 4th week, Amara's tray was empty, and Zikora hadn't eaten in a day. His cries pierced through her heart like knives. The wind no longer whispered hope. It howled despair. That evening, she walked to the hotel. It stood tall like a foreign ship in a village stream. Glossy glass windows, tiled floors, uniformed guards. Inside, everything smelled of chemicals and false promises. Chief Whale greeted her with a smile that made her skin crawl. He gave her a uniform, a short, tight dress, and asked her to try it on for the manager. He told her not to bring her son to work. "Customers don't like noise," he said with a wink. That night, Amara cried into Zikora's tiny chest. She had come too far to be forced into the dark again, so she returned the uniform. "No," she said plainly, handing it to the front desk guard. No? He asked, surprised. I'd rather starve clean than feed dirty, she replied. She turned and walked away, holding her son to her chest, whispering over and over, I'll find another way. I'll find another way. But the world was not done testing her. 2 nights later, her stall at the market was found in flames. The tray was burnt, the sackcloth ash, and her meager earnings stolen. Her only photograph of her mother, gone. Amara fell to the ground when she saw the charred remains. The crowd gathered, but no one stepped forward. No one asked questions. They all knew who had done it. Back home, Mama Chinyere rubbed balm into her hands and said, Do not weep for what fire takes. Weep only if the fire takes your will. Amara looked at her and asked, What can I do now? The old woman replied, You have flour, you have sugar, and you have a strong back. You will bake. But I don't know how to bake. You will learn. And so Amara did. She began rising at 4 a.m. to knead dough with bruised fingers. Mama Chinyere taught her everything: how to measure without cups, how to knead without a board, and how to use heat without burning sweetness. Together they made buns, coconut rolls, and meat pies with pepper that made the tongue dance. Zipporah watched wide-eyed, clapping at the smell of sugar and oil. She sold door to door now, and people bought, slowly, carefully, until one woman asked, Who baked this? Amara smiled softly and replied, I did. The woman nodded. Then bake me 10 more. That night, as Amara counted the coins in her wrapper, she looked down at Zipporah and whispered, They tried to silence us, but we're still here. Mama Chinyere grinned from the doorway. You're not just here. You're rising, like bread in the oven. But Amara knew one thing for sure. For every step forward, the shadows would return. And next time, they might not just take her, Trey. They might try to take her child, and she would be ready, because now she had purpose, and a name, and her fire could not be bought. By the time the harmattan breeze returned to dry the leaves on the guava tree outside Mama Chinyere's home, Amara had already become a woman of quiet strength. Her hands, once soft and innocent, were now toughened from kneading dough and balancing. Trays of pastries beneath the blazing sun. Her eyes, once wide with fear, now held something deeper. A quiet fire, as if she'd stared down life itself and refused to blink. But behind her steady voice and bright headscarves, there still lived an ache, the kind of ache that only silence knows how to carry. Zipporah was now nearly a year old, already crawling around the compound, standing with shaky feet, clapping each time Amara's hands rolled dough on the kitchen floor. He called her Ma, and often tugged her wrapper while she stirred pots. She'd smile at him, but sometimes her smile wouldn't reach her eyes. Not because she didn't love him, she did with all her soul, but because she hadn't, yet told the world who he truly was, and why she couldn't. Despite everything, life moved forward. Amara's small baking business had begun to blossom. She called it Rise and Shine, because each morning she baked as if it were the only sunrise she would ever get. She sold to school teachers, traders, even taxi drivers. She had a small, loyal following now, people who knew to wait for her buns because nobody else uses cinnamon like that girl. But it wasn't enough. She needed a stable kitchen, a place where her pastries wouldn't get soaked by the rain or crushed by market chaos. She needed peace. One Sunday morning, she dressed Zipporah in his best faded shirt and held him close as she walked through the town in search of something she couldn't yet name. Her legs led her to a small cream-colored building tucked away at the edge of town, a church. The cross above it was chipped, and the paint on the gate had peeled from years of heat and prayer. But when she stepped inside the courtyard, something wrapped around her heart like warm cloth. Something old. Something safe. It was the choir. Inside the open windows of the church, women's voices rose like smoke from burning incense. Harmonies so pure, they seemed to lift the dust off the floor. Amara stood frozen, tears forming in her eyes. It had been so long since she heard voices like these. Voices that didn't gossip, didn't scold, didn't lie. Only lifted. The choir paused, and a woman near the front turned to see her. She was tall, dark-skinned, with a long scarf flowing down her back and a smile that crinkled around her eyes. She stepped out and walked up to Amara. "Are you lost, my dear?" she asked gently. "No, Ma," Amara replied softly, bouncing Zipporah. "Just listening." The woman looked at the child, then back at Amara. "I'm Mummy Ogechi," she said. "I'm the pastor's wife. Come in. Sit with us." That simple invitation turned into a new beginning. Amara joined the church that very day, and by the next week, she was sweeping the pews before service, washing choir robes, and baking small pastries for the children after Sunday school. The women of the church, many of whom were mothers and widows, welcomed her with quiet nods and soft touches. Some had buried children. Others had been abandoned. They didn't ask Amara for her full story. They only saw the strength in her silence. Mummy Ogechi grew particularly fond of her. She admired how Amara never complained, even when her hands were blistered or her child cried throughout the night during the women's vigil. One evening, after a long prayer session, she called Amara aside. "You remind me of my younger sister," she said. "She died during childbirth. You carry pain, but you've turned it into purpose. Come tomorrow. I want to show you something." Amara came early the next morning. Behind the church, past the tall papaya trees, was a small empty room with a broken window and a rusted gas stove in the corner. Mummy Ogechi handed her a key. "This is the old kitchen. It hasn't been used in years. Clean it. Use it. It's yours." Amara fell to her knees. "But why?" she whispered, overwhelmed. Mummy Ogechi placed her hand gently on her shoulder. "Because sometimes the church is not just a place for sermons. It's a place for second chances." That night, Amara cleaned every tile with her bare hands. She scrubbed the stove, washed the windows, and cleared out the cobwebs. She sang softly as she worked, old songs her mother used to hum while pounding yam in kalu. For the first time in years, her voice returned. By the next week, her business was reborn. She began selling rise and shine buns outside the church gate. After every Sunday service, children danced around her tray, adults waited in line. The church elders began placing weekly orders for home deliveries. One woman even asked her to make a birthday cake for her daughter. The scent of sugar, yeast, and cinnamon filled the church air every weekend. Zipporah would sit by the window, clapping whenever customers praised his mother. "You'll go to school one day," Amara would whisper into his ear, "and you'll tell them your mother built a life with flour and fire." One afternoon, as she was closing up the kitchen, Mummy Ogechi approached her again. "You know," she said with a smile, "you should teach other young mothers how to bake. We have many here, abandoned, lost, but not useless. If you can teach one girl to rise like you, the Lord will bless you." And so began the Rising Room, a small weekly workshop at the church where Amara taught abandoned mothers how to bake, budget, and believe in themselves again. She taught them how to turn tears into recipes and pain into progress. By the third month, 5 women were baking under her. By the 6th, she was supplying to 2 nearby schools and 1 hospital. People began whispering again. But this time, it was different. "Who is that young girl?" "She's the one who bakes for the pastor's wife. She teaches other women. Now." Imagine! And Amara? She no longer flinched when people looked. She no longer looked over her shoulder or lowered her head. She stood tall, apron dusted with flour, Zipporah tied to her back, and hope rising like dough in a warm oven. She still hadn't told her full story. She still hadn't spoken the name of the man who had hurt her, the man who had caused her, father, to curse her name. But something deep within told her. That moment was coming, and when it came, she would not tremble. She would speak, and the world would listen. By the time Zipporah turned 2, the church compound that once echoed only with hymns now carried the sweet aroma of fresh bread each morning. The little kitchen behind the papaya trees, once forgotten and abandoned, had become the heart of a quiet movement. Its walls no longer held silence but laughter. Its shelves bore not just mixing bowls and flour, but the dreams of women who had once been tossed away like yesterday's market peelings. At the center of it all stood Amara, not just as a baker, but as a builder of something more powerful than pastries. She was building a second chance. It started with a name, Zipporah's Bread. It rolled easily off the tongue and echoed in conversations across the town. What began as a small tray outside the church gate had grown into orders so large that Amara barely slept. School teachers bought loaves for staff meetings. Hospital nurses placed orders by the dozen. Even the mayor's wife sent her driver one afternoon to pick up that soft butter bread that melts before you chew. At first, Amara baked alone, but soon she hired the very girls she once taught in the rising room. There was Ngozi, who had fled an abusive marriage. There was Bisi, a widow with 4 children, and there was little Amina, barely 16, rescued from the streets and still learning to smile again. Under Amara's leadership, the bakery wasn't just a business. It became a shelter, a school, a sanctuary. The church kitchen couldn't hold their dreams anymore. So one afternoon, after selling out her entire stock before noon, Amara wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked around at her team. "We need a bigger oven," she said simply. "And space." It was Mummy Ogechi who handed her the flyer. "There's a property not far from here," she said. "It's small but clean. If you're ready to grow, that might be your next step." Amara looked at the paper, then at her hands, flour still pressed into her fingernails, her palm rough with work. She thought of how far she had come, from walking barefoot out of her father's house with nothing to standing on the edge of expansion. That night, as Zipporah lay beside her, curled up like a question mark against her hip, she whispered, "Should I really dream this big?" And deep in her chest, a soft voice answered, "Why not?" The next week, she signed her name on a rent agreement for a 2-room shop in the heart of town. It had tiled floors, glass windows, and enough space for 3 ovens and a display shelf. It was more than she ever imagined owning. She painted the walls yellow, the color of sunrise. Above the entrance, a wooden sign read, "Zipporah's Bread, born from fire, risen by grace." Grand opening day was magic. The whole church came. Street vendors brought gifts. A local radio station even interviewed her. "How did this all begin?" they asked. Amara smiled. "With a little flour and a lot of pain." By the end of the week, her bakery had more customers than she could count. She baked through the night. The girls took shifts. The ovens never cooled. Even Zipporah had his roll. He stood at the counter handing out flyers with his big, curious eyes and his innocent, toothy smile. Customers adored him. One day, as Amara handed out a sample loaf to an elderly man who had just tasted her butter roll for the first time, he asked, "Who trained you?" She paused. Her throat tightened. "No one," she said after a moment. "Life trained me," he smiled. Well, life did a wonderful job. But even in her joy, Amara never forgot her scars. Each loaf she pulled from the oven reminded her of the night she ran barefoot through the dark, Zipporah clutched to her chest. Every golden bun reminded her of Mama Ciniere, who gave her shelter when no one else did. Every meat pie held the memory of the father who once loved her, then cursed her. then forgot her. And though she had forgiven him in her heart, she had never returned. Until the letter came. It was delivered in a plain envelope smudged with dust and time. The handwriting was shaky. Inside was a note from Mama Izine, her mother. "My daughter, if these words reach you, know they come from a heart that has not known peace since the day you left. I do not know if you are alive. I do not know where you sleep or how your child is. But I believe you are well. I believe you are strong. Your father has changed. Life has bent his back and quieted his mouth. He no longer walks with pride. He no longer judges. He only sits and waits. We miss you. Come home. Just once. No judgment. No questions. Just love. Mama." Amara sat for a long time, the letter trembling in her hands. She looked at Zikora, now playing with a wooden spoon in the corner of the bakery. He was strong, joyful, a child born in shame, now growing in light. And for the first time since she left Kalu, Amara considered going back. Not to beg, not to explain, but to show them what became of the daughter they discarded, to show them Zikora, not as a burden, but as a boy with the fire of 10 kings in his eyes, to show them that what they threw away had bloomed into something powerful, something whole, to show them that nothing, not betrayal, not shame, not silence, could keep her from rising. She stood slowly, picked up the letter and folded it neatly. Then she whispered to the oven, to the girl she once was, to the father who had broken her, and the mother who had always waited, "I'm ready." The road back to Kalu was the same crooked red dirt path Amara had walked 3 years ago. Only this time, her feet didn't bleed. She didn't walk barefoot. She didn't carry a bundle wrapped in shame or tears in her eyes. She drove. In a clean white van marked with a gold emblem, Zikora's bread. On the passenger seat beside her sat the very child they had once considered a curse, now dressed in crisp clothes, his tiny hand wrapped around a buttered roll, his eyes wide, with excitement. "Where are we going, Mama?" he asked, licking crumbs from his lips. She smiled softly. "To where your story began." In the back of the van were gift boxes, loaves of bread, jars of jam, and cinnamon rolls wrapped in satin, boughs. But more than that, the vehicle carried truth, the kind that had been buried under fear and silence for too long. And Amara had come to unearth it, not as a plea, but as a declaration. As the van rolled into Kalu, the village froze. Women carrying firewood on their heads paused mid-step. Children pointed and shouted. Men gathered in front of the local barbing shed and squinted toward the vehicle. It wasn't every day that a branded van rolled into their sleepy town, and certainly not one that carried the girl who had left in disgrace. But this time, she wasn't the girl anymore. She was the woman who rose. She parked in front of the old compound, still standing, but tired. The same cracked wall, the same wooden gate, but it looked smaller now, weaker. The place that once held the weight of her rejection now looked like it had aged too quickly, as if it had been waiting for her return to breathe again. She stepped, out first, her yellow Ankara dress billowing gently in the breeze. Zikora followed, holding a small gift box in his hands. "Mama, is this where Grandpa lives?" he asked, looking up at the weathered compound. Amara nodded once. "Yes, and today he will meet you." Word had spread like wildfire. By the time she approached the gate, a crowd had already begun to gather, some watching from behind doors, others stepping out boldly. Whispers followed her steps. "Is that not Amara? She came back. Look at her. She looks different." The gate creaked open, and then, there she was, Mama Izine. She stood at the entrance, clutching her wrapper, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Amara," she breathed. "My daughter, my child." Amara didn't say a word. She walked straight into her mother's arms and buried her face in the space between her shoulder and neck, the space she hadn't felt in 3 years. They cried together, not out of pain this time, but relief. The kind that comes when the weight you've carried finally slides off your back. Then the murmurs changed. "He's coming," someone said. "The chief, Elder Inamdi." And there he was. He stepped out slowly from the main hut, no longer the towering man she remembered. His back was slightly hunched, and his eyes were lined with guilt and age. The red cap he once wore with pride was missing. His cane tapped lightly against the cracked floor. He stopped in front of her. Time slowed. For a moment, it was just the two of them, father and daughter, standing between memory and redemption. Amara looked at him, and he looked at her. She saw the man who once told her bedtime stories by the fire, the man who carved her name into the mango tree when she took her first steps, the man who, with a single word, had cast her into the cold. His lips trembled. "You," he began. "You came back." She nodded slowly. "Not for pity, not to shame you, but because the truth deserves to live, even here." She stepped aside and gestured to Zikora. "This is your grandson." Gasps echoed from the crowd. Elder Namdi stared at the boy. His knees trembled. He dropped his cane and fell to the ground, weeping openly, something no one in Kalu had ever seen. He covered his face with his hands. "I cursed you," he whispered through tears. "I cast you out, and I never even asked. Who hurt you? I let my pride speak louder than my love. I failed." Amara knelt beside him. "You weren't ready to hear the truth," she said softly. "But you will hear it now." She reached into her bag and brought out a single envelope. Inside were photographs, audio recordings, and a letter. She placed them in his hands. "It was Mr. Ajadi," she said. "Your friend, the man who sat at our table. The one you called brother. He was the one. And I stayed silent, because I knew you wouldn't believe me." Elder Namdi's hands shook as he held the envelope. His face paled. The crowd murmured again, this time in outrage. Mr. Ajadi was a respected elder, now retired and living in the next village. His name had always been honored. Until now, Amara looked around. To everyone who called me names, when I left, who whispered behind my back, who taught their daughters to stay away from me. "This boy," she said, pointing at Zikora, "is not a mistake. He is the reason I found strength, the reason I kept going." She opened the back of the van and began distributing the gift boxes to the women and elders. "I didn't come back with anger," she said. "I came back with bread, with healing, with the life I built from the ashes you left me in." Mama Azin walked over to Zikora, lifted him into her arms, and kissed his forehead. "Forgive me," she wept, "for not running after you that day, for not protecting you." "You waited," Amara replied. "That was enough." "And Elder Namdi?" He looked up, eyes red, voice trembling. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked. Amara reached for Zikora's hand and placed it in his. "This is your second chance," she said. "Don't waste it." The village stood in stunned silence, and then, slowly, they clapped. First one woman, then another. Then, the entire compound erupted in cheers, in tears, in singing. That night, the compound of Elder Namdi was alive again, not with pride, but with joy. Amara stayed until sunset, helping Mama Ezini cook, watching Zikora play in the same yard she once ran through as a child. Before leaving, she placed a bag of money in her father's hands. "This is not payment," she said. "It's restoration. Fix this home. Let it become a place of healing for others too. And as the van rolled out of Kalu, Amara looked into the rearview mirror. Her past stood behind her, forgiven, faced, and finally free. But her future, it was just beginning. Weeks after her return to Kalu, the story of Amara's homecoming spread beyond the village. It traveled past red earth footpaths, through towns and radio waves, crossing into cities and social media timelines. People whispered it in marketplaces, shared it during church vigils, and forwarded the photos of a young woman standing with her son in front of a compound once filled with silence. To many, she was a mystery. To others, she was a miracle. But to the women who had been discarded, silenced and shamed, Amara was a mirror. And suddenly, across the land, women began to speak. The video of her speech in Kalu, where she boldly revealed her truth and introduced Zikora as a gift, not a burden, went viral. Blogs reposted it. Activists quoted her words. "I did not return to shame you. I returned to heal." These weren't just words now. They became a slogan painted on protest signs, printed on tote bags, sewn onto the uniforms of baker girls who once thought they had no future. Within months, Amara was invited to speak at conferences. She stood behind microphones in auditoriums filled with thousands. But she never used a teleprompter. She never read from paper. She always spoke from the scar on her soul. "I am not a motivational speaker," she once said. "I am a woman who was thrown away and learned how to rise, and now I help others rise too." Zikora's bread expanded rapidly. What began as a small shop beside a church kitchen became a chain of stores across 4 states. She refused investors who wanted to take equity and turn her story into profit. She built slowly, carefully, prioritizing single mothers, survivors, and girls who had been told they were unworthy. Every shop was managed by someone who had once been broken, and Amara didn't stop at bread. She launched the Zikora Foundation, an organization that offered safe housing, skills training, therapy, and legal support to young girls who had faced abuse and abandonment. Every girl who entered the program left with a skill, a support network, and a purpose. She returned to Kalu every quarter, not to visit pain, but to cultivate healing. The compound that once banished her became a regional training center, painted in white and gold, with a courtyard filled with laughter and loaves. Her father, Elder Namdi, now sat at the gate, not with judgment, but with stories. He told every visitor who asked, "She is my daughter, and everything you see today came from the girl I once rejected." He no longer walked with pride, but with humility. And every time Zikora visited, he shouted through the house, "My grandson is here! My light has returned!" Mama Ezine was the heart of the home again. She helped manage the village branch of Zikora's bread and became a mentor to young mothers in the region. People no longer whispered when they saw her daughter. They came with gifts, asking for prayers, recipes, and counsel. One day, during an awards gala in Abuja, Amara was asked on stage to receive the National Honor for Community Empowerment. The hall erupted in applause. A senator placed the medal around her neck and said, "You turned shame into service. You turned silence into salvation." Amara looked at the crowd, then at the cameras. "If you had told me 3 years ago," she said slowly, "that the same child who made me an outcast would be the reason I found my destiny, I would have laughed. But today I know. What society calls a mistake, heaven can turn into a movement." She paused, then added softly, "And sometimes, the stone that the builders reject becomes the cornerstone of the future." The room stood, still, then rose, clapping, weeping. That night, under the moonlight, she sat on the balcony of her hotel suite, Zikora asleep on her lap, and stared at the stars. She didn't speak. She just breathed, because sometimes survival speaks for itself, but the story did not end there. Months later, Amara began a podcast, The Rejected Rise, where women could anonymously share their stories of rejection, survival, and redemption. The first episode featured a girl from the North who had escaped a forced marriage. The second, a single mother who built a soap business after living under a bridge. Each story echoed a truth Amara had always known, deep in her bones. That broken doesn't mean finished. That silence doesn't mean shame. That pain is not the period. It's the comma before the next sentence. And though her face graced magazines and her name sat on boards, Amara never stopped baking. Every Friday, she rolled up her sleeves in the original church kitchen and kneaded dough with the same care as her very first loaf. Sometimes, when new trainees asked her why she still bothered with such simple work, she'd say, "Because this dough listened to me when no one else did, and it rose with me." And Zikora, he grew into a boy full of questions and courage. At age 5, he asked, "Mama, why do people always hug you and cry?" Amara smiled and replied, "Because they see the light that came from our darkest night." Years later, when Zikora gave his valedictorian speech at university, he looked out at the crowd and said, "My mother was once told to disappear, but instead she became the very voice the world needed to hear. I am not just her son, I am her legacy." And so, the girl who had once been cast out became a cornerstone, not because the world was kind, but because she chose to rise again and again until the world had no choice but to sit up and listen, because she was proof that the ones we throw away often return to lift us up. The wounds we hide can one day heal the world, and rejection is not the end. It is only the beginning of a legacy.